I am honored to be here to talk to you. My name is Jim Steinbacher. I am the Wi-Fi evangelist for WatchGuard. What does a Wi-Fi evangelist do? I get to come and talk to you about Wi-Fi. Let us get this going. Magic technology. Not all Wi-Fi is alike. Unfortunately, Wi-Fi is actually more dangerous to your networks than you ever thought possible. There are threats that come from casual hackers. There are threats that come from people within your companies. There are threats that are coming from the outside to steal your data. And it's just going to get worse. So what we're going to talk about here is we're going to go through a quick Wi-Fi 101. We're going to talk about what's happening with Wi-Fi. Not get feedback. We're going to talk about what's the difference between all the different enterprise vendors? That's going to surprise you. We're going to talk about the threats, the actual threats that we can see today with Wi-Fi. Talk briefly about how to fix that, how to implement Wi-Fi security to keep your networks safe today and tomorrow. We're going to talk about a cost-effective way to protect your existing networks without having to rip and replace your existing Wi-Fi network. And I want to remind you that Wi-Fi is a good way to make money for your company if you're in retail. So Wi-Fi 101. Everyone's a Wi-Fi expert, right? No. In fact, most people have these questions, even people that are network experts. Have you ever wondered why your phone can have 5 bars and terrible signal? Have you ever wondered why your router at home works great in this room, but back in the bedroom doesn't work well at all? If you go out in public, everyone's experience with public Wi-Fi is it's terrible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times it doesn't. 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, what does that really mean, and what's the difference? And have you ever wondered why, when you're sitting down working, the guy next to you, no problems at all, and you're trying to work and you have all kinds of problems? Has anyone ever experienced that? I know I have. And finally, have you ever wondered why Wi-Fi worked yesterday, today it doesn't? What changed? I didn't change anything in my network, so what changed? So we're going to talk about the basics of Wi-Fi. And with that, I'll help you understand how WatchGuard is different. If you or I are close together, we can have a conversation, nice, quiet tones. I talk to you, you hear me, you talk to me, I hear you. But as we move further apart in a room, it gets harder to hear each other. And eventually, we can get far enough apart that you can't hear me, and maybe I can't hear you either. Wi-Fi requires a two-way communication. Not only do I have to hear the signal from the access point to my phone, the access point has to hear me. And if it doesn't, then the communications break. And usually, the closer you are to the access point, the better the signal, and the better your communication is, right? We all have experienced that, I know. So now we're in the same room, we're having a conversation, and the room starts to fill up with people, and everyone's talking to each other. So the noise level in the room starts to rise. And so it takes less time. We're still talking, but as we move apart, pretty soon, much faster, we can't hear each other. Now, if I picked up a megaphone, I can still talk to you. You could still hear me. But if there's a lot of noise in the room, I can't hear you back. A higher signal-to-noise ratio, meaning a better signal over the top of the noise, is important for Wi-Fi. A focused signal means you can hear me better, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can hear you better. So an access point, like that access point right there, broadcasts 10 times more power than the phone. And that access point has technology, just like the megaphone, that directs the energy to you. But your poor phone doesn't. Your phone has much less power, and it broadcasts 360 degrees. So without that directional nature, the access point can't hear it. Now, Wi-Fi is very polite. Raise your hand just like in school, and the teacher calls on you. So it is in Wi-Fi. And remember, in school and in life, we're told to listen before we speak. Wi-Fi does that as well. And now, if it's your turn to talk and you have the opportunity, you can talk really, really fast. You can get a lot of data out in a very short period of time. But if you talk very slowly, less data in that same period of time. And remember what it's like to talk to your grandmother. Grandmother's a little hard of hearing. You talk to her, she says, "What? What did you say? Repeat that?" The same thing happens with Wi-Fi. If I only get part of your message to me at the access point, I say, "What? Would you repeat that?" And when you do that over and over, it slows down the network. And it seems like Wi-Fi isn't working. So remember, Wi-Fi is one-to-one. We might think that we're all talking to the access point at one time, but we're not. We're all raising our hand, and the access point is calling on us and our devices to talk, and then it stops, and it calls on the next person, and then it calls on the next person. It's always one-to-one. And if I'm a radio and I hear someone talking in my ear right next door, that interferes with my ability as a radio to hear. And so I ask the client to repeat and repeat and repeat, and it goes very slow. And the slower the data rate, the more it seems like the Wi-Fi just doesn't work. Remember I talked about gigahertz. A hertz is just an oscillation, 1 cycle per second. The lower the frequency, the more it's able to pass through walls. So your cell phone, for example, probably broadcasts at 700 megahertz. Wi-Fi works at 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz, because it's a lower frequency, penetrates walls better, penetrates the ceiling better. That's good and bad. It's good because the range is better going through the walls, but the problem is, remember, the access point has to hear you as well. So while that access point is blasting energy and it's going through the walls, your phone can't be heard back because it's lower power and doesn't penetrate the walls as well. With 5 gigahertz, it doesn't penetrate walls very well at all. But that's good, because if we're going to try and provide Wi-Fi for everyone in this room, we need to be able to have multiple access points here, and they need to not interfere with each other or interfere with the ones on the other side of the wall. So 5 gigahertz now is what we typically are using for most designs. And we have to try and design our systems so there is less interference. Now I'm going to tell you some secrets. The marketers who produce the data sheets lie. They do not tell you the truth. They exaggerate. You may read a data sheet and it says, our access point can support 250 clients. No. You may be able to get 250 people or client devices that have at one time or another talked to the access point. But if you're going to do real work, streaming video, more than just casual browsing, the most absolute maximum, top 50 clients, absolute maximum, and in most environments, it's about 20. So if you're designing a system for more than 20 devices to try and talk and do real work, you need to have more access points. So don't let the marketing guys fool you. The number of APs, access points you need, is driven not by the size of the room, but by how many people in a space you need to have talking to the access point wirelessly at the same time. That's what the important metric is. So when we design a system, it's best if we plan it and engineer it to be successful. Like the car here. As opposed to just throwing something together and hoping it works. You've got to do an RF design. And that starts with actually thinking about what the performance needs to be. So for example, I need to deliver 10 megabytes of data per second to 20 people. That is one design parameter you have to take into account to be successful in your Wi-Fi design. And here's what I mean in real life. We do what's called a predictive survey. We guess at where the placement and the number of access points we need. And the software calculates it and says, oh, this is going to be perfect. I could get by with just 4 APs there and I get coverage everywhere. This is a real predictive survey that was done by a partner. Then they went out and did a site survey. They took wireless devices out and they broadcast and they measured around to see what it really looked like. Doesn't look as good, does it? So if we don't do on-site testing, then we might think we're going to get good coverage, and that's what usually happens today. They do the first step, but when we actually try to use it, that's why, for us, the Wi-Fi is terrible and just doesn't work. So just like different shoes for different purposes and different sizes, remember that a Wi-Fi network that's designed here can't be the same as the one that's designed for over here. Every one is going to be different. Different number of access points that you need, different threats, different performance, and so it is more than just taking an access point and adding it. You have to think about it first. So now you're all Wi-Fi experts, right? So we're going to talk briefly about what's happening in the Wi-Fi market. If I can put this on. No surprises, the Wi-Fi market is growing. It's not going away. It's growing faster than wired market. It's growing faster than the cellular market by a lot. Look at this number right here. There are about 94 million hotspots in use today worldwide. In 3 years, they expect it to be 540 million access or hotspots. That's huge growth. We all will be part of that. We all want to be part of it. If we're resellers, we want to be able to sell and get some of that business. If we're users, we want to have access that works in more places. Now, believe it or not, most enterprise access points perform the same. Cisco, Meraki, Aruba, Ruckus, WatchGuard, we all perform Wi-Fi the same. You might say, well, why? Why? we all buy from the same people in Taiwan. There are 5 principal manufacturers of Wi-Fi devices in Taiwan that every one of the major companies buy from. We all buy from those same 5 vendors. We all use the same radios and chipsets in our access points. And they come from 3 companies: Broadcom, Qualcomm, and Marvell. Yes, there are some other companies out there, Realtek, for example. But the big 3, the enterprise vendors, buy from those same big 3. So do we. Most Wi-Fi vendors do not do their own design. They rely on those chip vendors to provide you with what they call a reference design. It's the same for this chipset and this chipset and this chipset. And so manufacturers get that and change it a little bit for this company, change it a little bit for that company, but mostly they're the same. In the previous standard, 802.11n, it came out with a concept called beamforming. Beamforming is much like using the megaphone to talk. That's transmit beamforming. There were 3 different options to implement that in that standard. But remember, those manufacturers in Taiwan, they don't want to take a risk. So instead of guessing which one was going to possibly win and being wrong, they chose not to do any. One company, however, was smart. Ruckus. Ruckus said, we're going to use this kind of beamforming, and we're going to design our own antennas, and this is how we're going to do it. And so Ruckus was very successful in hotels, in hospitals, because beamforming does work. But with 802.11ac, everyone uses it, and everyone uses exactly the same kind. So where Ruckus had advantages before, we all have that same advantage today. We all use the same antennas. We buy them from the same 3 antenna companies in Taiwan, for the most part. And everyone has a cloud controller. And it's all in Amazon Cloud. There might be some in Microsoft Azure. There might be some in Google. But everyone has their cloud in AWS. So, if there aren't any differences in the hardware, what makes one more valuable or less valuable than another? Well, first is the user interface. How do you get in and set up and control the access point? That's different for each one. How easy are they to use, to set up? You might have one vendor who has many features, but because they have so many, it's hard to configure it to work. Marketing budgets. What do I mean? If I'm Cisco, I have lots of money to spend. If I'm WatchGuard, a little tiny bit of money to spend. So you hear about Cisco And you may not have heard about WatchGuard. It's not because our products are different, it's because we don't have marketing dollars. And then there's the perception. I mean, the last network I built, I used Aruba. This new network, I'm going to use Aruba because they're the best. That's my head saying they're the best, not the facts. I might just like Aruba better. So that's the one I use. User preference is important. So we've talked about the hardware. Now let's talk about the security. We all support the same standards. WPA2 pre-shared key. WPA2 enterprise. And soon, WPA3. But that kind of security isn't what we're talking about when we talk about Wi-Fi security. Those standards there are just talking about the communication, the initial communication between you and the handshake to the access point, to set up the communication. What they don't do is protect you from threats, as you're going to see in a minute. And they don't protect you from knowing for sure that that SSID you're connecting to is the one you think you're connecting to. I think that's the Hotel Concorde, Le Concorde access point. I think when I look at my phone, that's what I'm connecting to. But maybe my phone has different ideas. It's not, it's really about worrying about what those outside threats are to our network. It's about identifying them. And then it's about immediately stopping them. Because if they go on for a long time, more of my people will be at risk. My data might be at risk. And most users are the weakest link in the chain, because they're the ones that accidentally open up the network to thieves. They accidentally give access to someone who shouldn't, who can come in and steal the data, steal the credit cards, steal my designs, my business, because, not because they meant to, but because it was an accident and they didn't know any better. Here's the frightening part. Wi-Fi hacking is commoditized. What do I mean by commoditized? This little hacking device here, $100. With it, I can steal every one of your bits of data that are on your phones. Your phone will help me do it, and you will never know. You think I'm kidding? You'll find out I'm not. If you go to YouTube and look, do a search on Wi-Fi hacking. I challenge you. Wi-Fi hacking on YouTube. There are 3.3 million videos there on how to hack Wi-Fi. That's something to be worried about for all of us. Here's what you should know. 802.11, that's the wireless spec. It's free to everybody. They can copy your network, they can use it, and it's not, believe it or not, illegal. And because of that, we need to know and be able to tell for certain what's a fake network versus what's a real network. There are protection methods that were implemented many years ago that caused problems. They protected your network, but they made everyone on your neighbor's network fall off and not work anymore. That's illegal. WatchGuard has been thinking about this. They've been working on solutions to keep your network safe. And here's the problem. It's called a man-in-the-middle attack. I go to a hotspot, I hook up. I think I'm connected to that hotspot. But what really happens is I'm connected to someone in between.